I'm not clear if I am muted yet or not.
You're unmuted, and we see James Lucas's picture. So I think you can go ahead, Paul.
You muted yourself. Oh, now you're there.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends, family, and brothers and sisters of sometimes the more adopted style. It's a pleasure to have you join us again this evening for a presentation by James Lucas on why the war chapters of the Book of Mormon. Brother Lucas has presented numerous times on the forum, most recently with Val Larson on parallels between Deuteronomy and the First Nephi. With Jonathan Neville, he has presented on the translation process. He is a lawyer participating regularly, often clarifying legal issues for us in the forum. He has written an interesting proposal for the popular electoral vote amendment, and that would address the conflict between those supporting the Electoral College and those supporting the popular vote. And so I submit that I think that merits consideration by our nation, and it may actually come up this evening, because this evening, as he addresses us on why the war chapters of the Book of Mormon, I think you'll find some interesting parallels between the lessons from the book and our modern politic. So please, welcome Brother Lucas back with your best listening skills and questions, and join me, if you would, in prayer. Prince of Peace, Lord of Love, potentate beyond time, we bow in veneration before you, the creator of a marvelous universe, whose function and glory testify of the embedded essence of the divine, such that everywhere we look, and we anticipate farther than the eye can see, evidence of your handiwork becomes clear as we look, for example, at every tree. For the apple tree does not eat its apples. The peach tree does not consume its peach. The tree of life adds rings and cycles. The oak, palm, coconut live each within their reach. No one consuming their own produce, but all generously giving their gift, each contributing to the good of all, giving humankind a lift. And while there may be some competition, warfare among your creation is rare. For you, as gardener, have provided enough time and space for all your creation to share. And as we consider why war in Brother Lucas's presentation, we address you in gratitude for our place in the tree of life, and then we also would ask for your spirit of peace to bless us in our deliberation, that we can learn our place, our purpose, to be grateful in the panoply of time and space, until we qualify with open eyes to see your presence in every face. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Brother Lucas, the forum is open to you. Thank you for coming back and sharing with us again on this very interesting topic.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if I can make my PowerPoint go. Wait a minute.
The introduction and prayer.
Whoops. Sorry, just bear with me for a second. Just get out of the way and share and share. Share. Okay. Slowly learning how to do this.
Oh, we work it out. You've got Alma 43 through 63 in front.
There we go. I'll see the thing that says Alma 43 to 63, 20 to 30, why the war chapters?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so the questions that I'd like to address in this little presentation are, focused on the so-called war chapters, which clearly, but I'm going to expand this discussion later to address issues of how those chapters fit in the broader structure of the Book of Alma. And I hope that I certainly can't hope to give a presentation, especially addressing these subjects, as lovely as the one we had last week, but I hope that it will be edifying in its own way. And we'll see if you agree with my conclusions. So this section of the Book of Mormon clearly constitutes a discrete subsection of Mormon's work. By page count, these chapters constitute 16% of what we have of the actual Book of Mormon that was written by Mormon himself. Now, they're sometimes called the war chapters, but this is odd because there certainly are many, many other accounts of wars in the Book of Mormon. Yet these chapters stand out. And, it's appropriate, I think, to designate them as the war chapters. But these chapters, these chapters basically cover the career of Captain Moroni. But Moroni, Captain Moroni, is an odd choice. So to give us some perspective, Moroni lived almost 500 years before Mormon. So he's basically halfway back through the Nephites' 1,000-year history from Mormon. So to give some perspective, that would be as though someone were going to be writing something today of a moral, ethical, spiritual nature, and say, I'm going to look at historical wars to illustrate some ethical points that I'd like to make in my work. But the writer of today, instead of talking about the Iraq War, or the Gulf War, or the Vietnam War, or World War II, or World War I, or the Spanish-American War, or the American Civil War, or the Mexican-American War, or the Revolutionary War, or the War of the Austrian Succession, or the Napoleonic Wars, or the War of the Spanish Succession, or the 30 Years' War, it would be as though the writer today said, I am going to use war to, make some engage into some ethical and moral discussions. And the war I'm going to focus on are the wars of the era of Queen Elizabeth I of England. We're going to just skip all the wars that have happened since then, including, and remember, this is Mormon writing, who himself had a career as a military leader. And he basically said, I'm going to say very little about my war career or the wars in the 500 years preceding me. No, we're going to jump back in time and talk about Queen Elizabeth I and the wars of the Spanish Armada. So, I think this is always helpful for me to remind myself that Mormon's decision to focus so much space on the career of Captain Moroni is an authorial decision. It's a literary decision that is really quite kind of unusual when you look at it in this perspective. So I'd like to ask some questions just to think about this. These are the questions we're going to address in this presentation. So why did Mormon reach back centuries into Nephite history to give such a detailed attention to the career of Captain Moroni as compared to any of the numerous other wars that occurred in the course of the Nephite history, including the ones in which Mormon himself was the commander-in-chief of the Nephite armies? Another question is that these chapters address the moral dimensions of warfare, government, and politics, but I look at them more broadly in terms of just conflicts in general. They're full of all kinds of conflicts. And so I think a question we can ask ourselves is, when Mormon is talking about this era of Nephite history that's just full of so many different kinds of conflicts, why does this have relevance to our lives, which may or may not have a lot of conflicts in them. Next question is, how does this fit into the broader Book of Alma? So up to this point, the Book of Alma has been focusing on pretty spiritual matters. It talks about Abinadi. It talks about the story of Alma. It talks about the story of Alma the Younger and the sons of Mosiah and their missionary journeys to the Lamanites. It contains a lot of doctrinal and preaching materials. And then, so to suddenly at chapter 43, or it's chapter 20 in the RLDS versification, it just suddenly shifts to this, war story, wartime political and politics story. So how does this all fit into the Book of Alma? And finally, the purpose, of course, of the Book of Mormon, according to Moroni's title page, is convincing the Jew and the Gentile that Jesus is the Christ. And yet, if Mormon's book, this larger book, basically from First Nephi through the Book of Mormon, in the Book of Mormon, were not First Nephi, but rather the Words of Mormon through the Book of Mormon. If you reduced it to prophecies and doctrine directly relating to Christ and his visit to the Americas, it would be a much shorter work than what it is. And by my count, things that are directly addressing Jesus are only about a fifth of the text that Mormon provides us. So we ask this question: why all this other stuff? Why all this politics and social commentary and economics and discussions of wars and conflicts? So anyway, these are some questions to think about as that I'm going to try to get to in this presentation. So we start these sections with Mormon giving some description of his hero, Captain Moroni, and clearly Captain Moroni is a hero to Mormon. I mean, he named his eldest son after this figure from hundreds of years before in Nephite history. It's as though someone today were to decide to name their child Algernon, or some other very archaic kind of a hundreds of years old name. So clearly Mormon holds Captain Moroni in high esteem. So we have these verses, like, for example, here, verily I say unto you that if all men had been and were ever to be like unto Moroni, behold, the very powers of hell shall be shaken forever. Yea, the devil would have no power over the hearts of the children of men. And he also portrays Captain Moroni as being not a bloodthirsty man. He says here that they were sorry to take up arms against the Lamanites because they did not delight in the shedding of blood. And this was not all. They regretted being the means of sending their brethren to the next life in their sinful state. So he has a religious sensibility. He's portrayed as having a religious sensibility and as being a great heroic figure. So to illustrate this, we have this example in these. Now, I just should note that the chapters and verses of the LDS version is what was originally given in this presentation, and I put the versification chapters and verses from the Community of Christ version in parentheses after them. So we have this incident, which Mormon describes to us, where they're in the middle of a battle. The Zarahemna is the commander of the Lamanite forces. In the middle of the battle, Moroni looks like they're going to win. They're pressing the Lamanites and they're pushing them, and looks like they're going to be able to really, take out the Lamanites. And Moroni stops the battle, and he offers to have a truce. He offers that if they'll lay down their weapons, to let them withdraw without any further bloodshed. And so this is an example. You know, he's got the upper hand, he's winning the battle, and then he stops it and says, you know, look, let's have a truce, and if you lay down your weapons, we'll let you withdraw peacefully with no further bloodshed. But then, interestingly, Zerahemnah he records the words of Zerahemnah, and we'll come back to this in my presentation later. And he rejects the offer. The Lamanite leader rejects the offer, saying, "We are not of your faith. We do not believe that as God has put us into your hands, but rather your cunning that has preserved you," because Captain Moroni had put body armor on the Nephites, whereas the Lamanites at this point did not have body armor. And so then he concludes here, and now when Zerahemnah had made an end of speaking these words, Moroni returns his sword to Zerahemnah, and which he had captured, and said, "Okay, well, that's the way you want it. We'll end the conflict." And again, it's kind of bloody, but it shows respect for the commander of the other side, that he was handed back his weapons so that he could die with honor, at least within the context of his culture, which he does, because the Lamanites are in fact defeated very, very decisively after this incident. So anyway, so this is you know, Mormon is portraying Captain Moroni in a very favorable light. However, and this is what I find intriguing, which one of the things I'd like to focus on. He also shows us that Captain Moroni's patience and temper has its limits. So let's just look at a few incidents here where Mormon describes Moroni's temper. You know, so we have here, and now Moroni was angry because of the stubbornness of the Lamanites, and he commanded his people that they should slay them. And this is, again, the Nephites have been equipped with body armor, whereas the Nephites are not. And so he presses them into battle where they have an advantage. And here's some others. This is scattered all throughout the various chapters here. Here's one where it came to pass that Moroni, who was, this is now Amalickiah, is now the commander of the armies. And Moroni is angry with Amalickiah. Later on, we're going to cover this incident a little bit more. The government doesn't give him the supplies or support that he feels he needs. So we have these chapters, which we'll look at a little bit later, where Mormon says, remember, this is Mormon writing about his personal hero, Captain Moroni. He says he was angry with the government. And we get, and then here's another incident in chapter 54, which is chapter 26, where again, they're having a negotiation with the Lamanite commander in battle, and Moroni is reported as sending an epistle to the Lamanite commander saying, "I would tell you concerning that awful hell that shall receive murderers such as thou." Now, just to put this, and then he goes on to say that thou art a child of hell. Now, just to put this in context, this is a negotiation where he's trying to negotiate an exchange of prisoners. So we would have to say that Captain Moroni was a little bit short on diplomatic skills. And this is something that, again, Mormon portrays, quite honestly, Captain Moroni's short temper. And then here's some more. This is in the incident where he's corresponding with the leaders of his own government, and Captain Moroni, accuses them of being lazy, being incompetent, and threatens to, stir up an insurrection against his own government. So this is, again, we need to look at this in the context that this is Mormon describing his personal hero as short-tempered and not at all diplomatic. Now let's focus on this incident, which is sort of towards the end of the 4 chapters. So we have here, Mormon gives us, the full text of an exchange of epistles between Captain Moroni and the central government. And he's very upset with them because they haven't been supplying the material and the men that he feels he needs. And this is where he threatens to come and overthrow them and destroy them. And this is not an idle threat. Remember, Moroni has an army. So this is a serious a threat that he's making, because he has an army, and he could very well come and overthrow the government if he wanted to. And so now we get to my next point here, which is that although Captain Moroni is really the central character of this part of the Book of Alma, he's not the only person we meet. So in this particular incident toward the ends of the war chapters, while Captain Moroni may be Mormon's model Christian warrior, he also introduces us to Pahoran, who is the model Christian politician. And so after Captain Moroni has written a letter angrily denouncing the central government and threatening to bring his army, which he has an army, to overthrow the government and bring about their utter destruction, this is the letter that Pahoran, who's the chief governor of the land, writes back to Moroni. And, he says that I do not joy in your great afflictions, and I'm not angry with your letter, but do rejoice in the greatness of your heart. I, Pahoran, do not seek power, but save only to retain my judgment seat, that I may preserve the rights and liberties of my people. And my soul standeth, I'm not able to read the bottom part of this, but in any case, he basically writes to Moroni and describes that, in fact, they have been having to deal with insurrections at the Zarahemla, and that he himself actually has been driven out of Zarahemla. And he suggests that even though Captain Moroni has just written this very hot-tempered, angry letter to him, instead Pahoran says, let's get together and take back the government, and then you can press our cause of preserving the liberty of our nation. So he's very calm, and I think that it's a fascinating exchange because, as I said, Moroni comes off not very well in this exchange. I mean, he's furious, he's hot-tempered, he jumps to conclusions, he makes threats, and Pahoran is reasonable, calm, politic, diplomatic, and patient in his response. It's very interesting. Remember, this is all Mormon who's he's making decisions as an author-editor to put these descriptions into his account about his great personal hero, Captain Moroni. So anyway, in the rest of other parts of these chapters, Mormon describes to us some of the challenges that Captain Moroni is facing. It's not just invasion from the Lamanites. And as we just saw in the later incident involving Governor Pahoran, all throughout this period, these chapters portray the Nephite nation as suffering from internal divisions. There are civil wars. There are elements of the Nephite society who are willing to aid the enemy, assist the Lamanites with the goal of overthrowing the Nephite government, which it'd be hard to describe it as fully democratic by our modern standards, but by ancient standards, I think one could say that this popular government, that there was some kind of voice of the people involved in making political decisions and electing the government, was probably as democratic as any government could be at this era of human history. And they're trying to defend it, but they are being undermined constantly by treason and civil war. And Mormon describes this, all of this. So we have incidents where Mormon describes incidents where Moroni, Captain Moroni, is forced to not just fight off the Lamanite invaders, but he has to rally the Nephite nation itself to defense and to oppose the internal forces which wish to restore a more autocratic or monarchical government. So we have the famous incident of Moroni and the Title of Liberty, but let's look at what he writes on the Title of Liberty. In memory of our God, our religion, our freedom, our peace, our wives, and our children. So this is, I think, significant in that it shows us the things that Captain Moroni felt were valuable and worth defending. But then we have, again, he's constantly, so the reason he had to raise the Title of Liberty was precisely because the Lamanites were invading, and a lot of the elements of Nephite society were not willing to defend their nation against this invasion. And in fact, the Mormon informs us that the Lamanite invasion was largely the result of Nephite dissenters who went over to the Lamanites and riled them up and stirred them up to make this invasion of the Nephite lands. Then much later, even after the incident with Pahoran that we just saw, we had more insurrections. There's just continual insurrections and civil war in the Nephite nation that Captain Moroni has to deal with all throughout these chapters. So we have this incident in chapter 62, which is chapter 29, about the men of Pachas as the leader of these rebellious people. And now there's an earlier incident where the rebellion was so overwhelming that Captain Moroni is described as having come in and simply executed the rebels without going through trials. Now, in this later one, Mormon again makes the point that they were again executed, but this time they followed whatever legal procedures existed in the Nephite system of government, where he, in the earlier rebellion, which is in chapter 48, and the Mormon kind of makes excuse, he's kind of seems to be kind of trying to justify. He said, "Oh, well, they couldn't have the trials because there wasn't enough time, adequate time." So, but what's interesting to me is that Mormon, although he's kind of citing a little bit, trying to justify what Captain Moroni does, he, at least as I read it, I see Mormon being kind of a little bit embarrassed, but nonetheless, he is an honest historian and he records the facts about what happened with what Captain Moroni had to do in the course of his career as the leader of the Nephite military. Now, another fascinating bit of Mormon's writing in these chapters is the fact that he's he's writing on plates, right? This is very difficult. Everybody always all the scribes throughout the Book of Mormon are always telling us how hard it is to write on these metal plates. So this is, everything that Mormon puts in here it's difficult and it's costly in terms of time and effort to put it in here. And yet, again and again, another thing that fascinates me is that Mormon gives us full quotes from the antagonists. So here's an example from Alma chapter 54, which is 25, where he has, so Malachiah has been killed, and now his brother Ammoron is taken over as commander of the Nephite Lamanite forces. But again, these, and so, again, Captain Moroni has reached out, tried to start some kind of negotiations with the Lamanites. And this is, Mormon takes the time to record in full the Ammoron's reply. And he rejects what Captain Moroni has written. And I like these parts at the end where he says, I am Ammoron, and a descendant of Zoram, who you pressed and brought out of Jerusalem, which is kind of an interesting variation on how Nephi records the story of Zoram. And then he says, now behold, I'm a bold Lamanite, which he actually wasn't. He wasn't really a Lamanite. And this has, we are waging this war to avenge our, the wrongs that you've done against our ancestors and so forth. And so you get to hear the Lamanite side of the story, which, I compare it to a situation where if somebody were writing a history of World War II, and would you put some quotes from Mein Kampf in there saying, well, I want you to understand the Nazi point of view and why they were going to war. But Mormon does this, and he does it again, and at several other places in the Book of Mormon. Like, for example, later on, he gives a full text of a letter from the captain of the Gadianton robbers, giving the Gadianton robbers side of the story. So now let's expand the discussion here and ask how these chapters fit within the broader context of the Book of Alma. So we've just seen that in these chapters, of course, he's describing his personal hero, Captain Moroni, the model Christian warrior. But then in other parts of the Book of Alma, he gives us other examples. Most notably, you have the people of Ammon, who were originally called the anti-Nephi Lehies. So these are completely are nonviolent. These are Lamanites who've converted to the gospel and decide to lay down their weapons of war and are so committed to this resolution that they allow themselves to be slaughtered until the Lamanites who are attacking them are so moved by their example that their Lamanite attackers then convert. And so we have here Captain Moroni, another illustration of Captain Moroni and his title of Liberty. But then this is a Minerva Teichert painting of the people of Ammon. And you see in the middle, them kneeling rather than resisting the people who are coming to kill them. So we have this ideal example of nonviolence that's given also in the Book of Alma by Mormon. So you have the model Christian pacifists, and you have the model Christian warrior. And the fascinating thing to me is that Mormon doesn't opine as to which is the better. He just tells these stories. So I would note here, our friend Christopher Thomas, when he was writing his book about the Book of Mormon, he discovered that the story of the people of Ammon, or the anti-Nephi Lehies, was in fact the exact center of the Book of Mormon by word and page count. And he verified that with his friends at the religion department at BYU, who of course had done this kind of research. So our friend Chris Thomas has in his book, he makes a point of, you know, and he comments, he says, there is a lot of warfare in this book, but then I came across, and I'm paraphrasing him, but this is in his book. But then I came across the story of these anti-Nephi Lehis and realized that's the exact center of the Book of Mormon. You know, now, would that be the center of the Book of Mormon if we had all of Mormon's book, if we had the lost pages? I'm not quite sure, but still, it struck our friend Chris Thomas quite forcefully that it appeared that story was situated by Mormon in the exact middle of the book. And then, of course, we have this dramatic story of the young Ammonites warriors who their parents won't go to war, so they decide that they're going to go to war. But again, I'm fascinated by how Mormon writes about this, because of course it's very easy. I mean, this is a fun story. I don't know about folks in the Community of Christ, but certainly in the LDS Church, this is the story that's always told to teenagers to, encourage them to be valiant in the gospel. And you can get T-shirts with stripling warriors on them and so forth. But of course, in this part of the Book of Mormon, it's not, Mormon is quoting from the Epistle of Helaman, who is this Moroni's second in command and also leader of the church, and who it was under his direct command that these Ammonite young men were fighting. And, his description is, I don't know, it just reads differently than the, rah, rah, go, beat him, fight him, push him back kind of bravura that I often see in our accounts of the stripping warriors. Instead, Moroni or Mormon gives us this epistle from Helaman where he's describing this as, to the great astonishment and the joy of our whole army, they were wounded, but there were no casualties or mortalities. And their preservation, he says, was astonishing to our whole army. And it just reads to me like Mormon is relating to this veteran warrior who is seeing a miracle. And, all of these hardened Nephite warriors are astonished by this. And I think that's the lesson, as I read it, that Mormon is trying to convey to us in relating this incident. So let's expand it even more into the Book of Alma. And who's the great figure of the first part of the Book of Alma? Well, the great figure of the first part of the Book of Alma is, of course, Alma the Younger. And, Mormon devotes a great deal of space to describing the career of Alma the Younger. And yet here we have, if you look at the two great figures, if you will, the two great heroic figures of the Book of Alma that Mormon gives us, that Mormon deliberately, as an editorial authorial choice, chooses to highlight in this part of the Book of Mormon, they are very different. Alma the Younger is converted in a dramatic, experience. He goes off to become a missionary. He becomes a prophet and leader of the church. The work is, he's a preacher, he's a, theologian, he's a teacher, and this is all portrayed by Mormon. And then you have Captain Moroni, who's hot-tempered, short-tempered, not at all diplomatic, but is devoted and loyal and faithful. But we don't get hardly anything about, it's clearly indicated by Mormon that Captain Moroni is a believer and he has faith, but there's very little about Captain Moroni's personal religious views. We have no sermons from Moroni. He can give a rallying, good, speech to the troops, but we have no sermons from Captain Moroni. So it's a very different kind of Mormon presents us two different kinds of people as the two great figures that are portrayed in the Book of Alma. And I have to just, if I can take one more minute here, point out still more subtleties in the Book of Alma. So I'm fascinated to go back again to the story of the Alma the Younger and the Sons of Mosiah. We have this is from descriptions of them returning from their missionary journeys, and this is actually Ammon who is giving this particular who's being quoted here by Mormon. And it's interesting. He describes the reaction of the Nephites to their proposal by the royal sons. Remember, the sons of Mosiah were the princes of the ruling house of Alma Mosiah, and they were, they were going to, all of them turn down their responsibility to assume the throne and instead go off on this crazy missionary journey to the Lamanites. And it's interesting. Here's what Ammon describes was the reaction of the Nephites. If we look at verse 24, which is 106 in the Communion of Christ version, for they said unto us, do you suppose you can bring the Lamanites to a knowledge of the truth? Do you suppose you can convince the Lamanites of the incorrectness of the traditions of their fathers? As stiff-necked a people as they are, whose hearts delight in the shedding of blood. And then he goes on, they said, it's better to go to war with them. The only good Lamanite is a dead Lamanite, was essentially the attitude of the Nephites as portrayed by Mormon in his book. And so I'm intrigued by this because, first of all, Mormon is plainly displaying the anti-Lamanite prejudice of his own people. And then, of course, the rest of the Book of Mormon is full of Mormon continually, subtly undermining the anti-Nephite or anti-Lamanite prejudices of his own people. Because what do we have in the rest of the Book of Mormon? We have story of righteous Lamanite after righteous Lamanite after righteous Lamanite. You have the people of Ammon. You have Samuel the Lamanite. You have later, even in the last days, he describes how the Nephites are no better than the Lamanites and so forth. So he just, he subtly undermines this message of anti-Lamanite prejudice or this attitude of anti-Lamanite prejudice, which is he honestly portrays as having been pervasive in his own culture. So anyway, that's a bit of a sidelight, but still. So let's. I'm getting close to the end here. So I asked this question: what is Mormon trying to do in the Book of Alma? This is a book. It is a comprehensive book. It's a long book, but it is, it's not the Book of Mosiah, and it's not the Book of Helaman. It's its own book. And it seems to just go all over the place. It's got all kinds of different stories. And the question I ask is, as an author-editor, what was Mormon trying to do in telling us the selection of stories that he put into the Book of Alma? So let's look at who Mormon tells us about. Well, first there's Captain Moroni, who I see from Mormon's description of him is a regular guy. He's got a short temper. It's definitely not a diplomat, nor is he a visionary, but he is loyal, righteous, and has a steady faith in Christ in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. It's not just warfare, but it's treason and civil war and so forth, all through the end of his life. And it's not a long life. He is wounded in battle and dies of his wounds. And by my calculation, Captain Moroni was only 45 years old when he died, at least as I calculated. So this is the life of Captain Moroni. But then Mormon is giving us all these other people. He's giving us Alma the Younger, the repentant apostate turned valiant missionary. He gives us Alma the Younger. He gives us Pahoran, the model Christian politician, to contrast with the model Christian warrior. And he gives us the Ammonite parents and their sons, the model Christian pacifists. So these are all told in the context of a real life narrative of the great challenges. So what my view is that, sorry. I don't know if that's not me, that's me talking, but I don't know where that comes from. Let me go back. All right. So basically, my view of the book of Alma is that he has what his purpose in the book of Alma was to show us many, many different examples of different ways of living as a Christian in the face of real life challenges. And as the great author that he he doesn't tell us, he shows us. When I first started to venture into efforts to be a screenwriter, I was told, don't tell it, show it. And that's what Mormon does here. He doesn't lecture us. He doesn't, editorialize about which choices are better or worse, which is the better example, which is the more admirable example. He just shows us all these different kinds of Christians living in very difficult circumstances and many different ways of living a Christian life in response to these challenges. He doesn't tell us, he just shows us. So good. All right, I'm going to skip that. I think I made a YouTube of this, and so that must be what was happening. I didn't delete one of the YouTube things. But anyway, the previous slide, I said that I consider Mormon to be one of the greatest Christian writers of all times. And I would present this analysis of the book of Alma as being an illustration of that, proof of that argument. As his mission, Mormon's mission, is to show us many different ways to live as a Christian in a fallen world full of hard choices. And of course, we end with this quote from the Sermon on the Mount: "By their fruits ye shall know them, for not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of God, but he that doeth the will of my Father who is in heaven." This is what Mormon is spending all of this space in his book to try to show us how to do. So that is so those are my thoughts on the book of Alma, and I'd be very interested to hear all your thoughts. I think I have I ended the share? Stop share.
Yes.
Okay. There we go.
As host, I get to jump in first, and I thank you very much, Brother Lucas, for your insight. There's a comparison that you've made that you didn't quite make that I'd like for you to expand upon, because we brought Bacchus and the Kingsmen who refused to, they refused to take up weapons to defend their own government, and they were executed because of it. That as a comparison with the sons, the the Anti-Nephi Lehi young men, is quite a contrast. And yet I wish he had given us his editorial comment. Maybe you can do that for us.
Well, my editorial comment would be that Mormon doesn't make editorial comments. That's part of my argument, is that I think Mormon is being very deliberate in refraining from making editorial comments. And my argument is that by just telling the stories, he's leaving it to us to make those decisions and to make our own evaluations as to which might be the proper course or proper example to follow. And, the comparison you just made, I think that's a very, insightful kind of comparison. But again, it's one that's Mormon leaves it to us to make. And that I see, my argument is that is exactly Mormon's editorial, authorial strategy, that he does it intentionally, refrains from drawing conclusions and opining as to which was the better course and so forth. And that's a deliberate decision on Mormon's part as author editor in the Book of Mormon. So, I'm
Thank
dodging
you.
your.
And thank you also for suggesting the presentation by Rena last week was lovely. I
It was.
appreciated everyone's comments on that, and for me it was a powerful reminder. Good. We have other hands up.
Okay, we got Roger and then we have Val. Roger.
Okay, James, I just want to tell you that is one fantastically researched presentation. Gave me a lot of things to think about. I think there's so much more in there than I never even picked up on. And maybe, I've always appreciated Mormon for everything he did, his abridging and his inspiration, but maybe his brilliance that you've brought out is really something I haven't appreciated yet. So that was some brilliant stuff. In fact, even suggesting that he named his son after Moroni, which may be obvious. I never even thought of it before, but it could very likely be what he did that for. But I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you for that. I look forward to watching it a few more times.
I would note that in the in the Book of Mormon has lots and lots of names in it, and the name Moroni after the time of Captain Moroni, at least as recorded in the Book of Mormon, the name Moroni does not appear again for 500 years until Mormon names his son for that name. So that may be that there were people named Moroni and they just didn't find their way into being recorded in the Book of Mormon. But nonetheless, that the name is not a typical one that appears again in the Nephite records until Mormon uses it as the name for his son.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Val, go ahead, and then Rick.
Okay, so Jim, you raised all kinds of interesting questions and issues and insights here. I wanted to speak a little bit to or comment on your interesting frame about this being like the Elizabethan and Elizabethan wars. So my theory about the Book of Mormon is it's actually a lineage history mostly of the Alma family, and that Mormon was also part of that family. He would have been the 10th generation from the first Alma. And so it's kind of like you might see Elizabeth II, if she were a lineal descendant of Elizabeth I, maybe referring to her. But in the case of Mormon, he's a general, and the very first wars led by people in his family would have been the war, which he recounts in some detail, of Alma II, leading the war against the Amlicites, and then of Moroni, who I think you're absolutely right that he named his son after him. And another thing that's sort of interesting about that Moroni is that Moroni succeeded in doing what the military task that Mormon was essentially charged with and failed at. He's the one example we have in the Book of Mormon of someone leading a massive military campaign, successfully defending the Nephite polity against major Lamanite attacks. And that's exactly what Mormon was charged to do and what he didn't succeed in doing. But you can see why he might have had Captain Moroni as his hero, because they were, in a sense, in the same position. And Mormon himself his name seems to go back to that same period too, because he's named after the Waters of Mormon. So he had a lot of reasons. I don't think it was arbitrary that he felt these connections to the first and second Alma and to Captain Moroni. They're also in that account you're giving, as you mentioned, both the stripling warriors, and in that section, another great thing he does here. I agree with you. He's very artful in how he develops these war chapters. One of the things that he does is there's a contrast between the Western Front and the Eastern Front. So on the Eastern Front, you have Captain Moroni, you have Lehi, you have Teancum, all these great heroic military figures that we all think of, and he shows them succeeding through military brilliance. It's like how they arm their forces, it's strategy, all kinds of strategy things. And on the Western Front, where you have Antipas, who is killed, and then Helaman, who leads the stripling warriors, it's a completely different sort of set of principles by which they triumph. And I think Mormon is drawing that conscious contrast between the faith, the power of the faith, and kind of miraculous things that happen over on the Western Front under the leadership of Helaman, and what happens on the Eastern Front under the leadership of Captain Moroni. So you see both the power of effective military strategy on the one side, and on the other, of the power of a faith of an unshaken faith in God and reliance on God. And on the Pahoran piece, I think your reading of Pahoran as a model Christian politician is certainly a valid reading. I do think one can have a less charitable reading of him, a more skeptical hermeneutic with respect to Pahoran, that he might have been an oily politician who, as soon as and you were right, Captain Moroni had an army. So what's an oily politician going to say when, in response to the kind of a challenge that he got from Captain Moroni? He might say those same things, but whether they're all can be taken in good faith is, I don't know for sure. They maybe. Go ahead, jump in.
I would make the comment that even if that's true, it again, the message of the Book of Mormon is that even oily politicians there's hope even for oily politicians. They can be even they can be righteous.
I think you're probably right that he was an oily politician, but that I think it's an open possibility in the text. The last thing I want to say about it is the anti-Lehi Nephites being right at the center of the Book of Mormon is really interesting, because and actually I don't know if this is exact center, but one of the things that happens there is the Ammonites start burning them to death. And I think it's not an accident that when Abinadi was being killed, he gave what struck me as the strangest prophecy. And just lately, I reviewed an article for The Interpreter where this person was talking about how there's a chiastic structure that has right at the middle of it the Ammonites burning the anti-Nephi Lehis. And when Abinadi was killed, he gave this prophecy that which is not what you'd expect. You'd expect him to give a prophecy about what you're doing to me is going to happen to you and your descendants. That wasn't the prophecy he gave. He gave the prophecy, your descendants will do this same thing to other people that you're doing to me. It's a how's that justice? But what it does do is it incorporates the anti-Nephi Lehis into the Nephite polity, because the foundation of their religion was Abinadi. He was like their Joseph Smith, the founder of their religion. And in the very moment of his death, he gave a prophecy that was fulfilled by those anti-Nephi Lehis. And then when Ammon and others were coming to the Nephites and saying, we need to accept these people into our community, I think Abinadi had uttered in his at his death a prophecy specifically designed to facilitate that, which is a real tribute to Abinadi, but also of the foresight of God in preparing the Nephites to recognize, hey, these people are with us. They have a connection back to Abinadi, our founding prophet, who actually foresaw their suffering and meant for them to be incorporated with us. Anyway, it's a really interesting section. You had lots of interesting insights. I apologize for not giving you more time to respond here.
Okay, no, all interesting thoughts.
Okay, Rick, go ahead.
Okay, hi James.
Hello.
I'm up here in the corner. Well, at least in my corner. I appreciate your study and your presentation of these different people and all the questions, the 4 questions that you asked about why do we have so much militarism in the Book of Mormon, and what could it mean to us today? What did it mean back then? I mean, why did Mormons spend so much hard writing to give us all this strategy? And, you know, we tricked them this way and they were wise, so we tricked them a different way. And, you know, and so that has always been a question of mine, and why it was included in the Book of Mormon, which is supposed to be such a sacred, it was specifically designed to be sacred writing. And Moroni, I think, is a great example that Mormon wanted to include. I mean, how many people today have named their children Moroni just so they would turn out, you know, fabulous? But he was a hell shaker. It said if everybody would have been like him, you know, even the foundations of hell would have been shaken. I mean, does Mormon ever say that about Alma?
No.
So Moroni was an example of sometimes you got to fight. And so when your first question of why Mormon went back to the war years, I think it's like there's going to be tough times. They went through tough times during that time of Moroni and Helaman, but they were victorious. Okay, and the time that you described about where the strategy where they had Lehi hiding behind a hill and they got him trapped in the river. There's no escape. That strategy was used in Joshua 8 with the city of Ai. And in that Bible story, there's no hesitation. I mean, there's no stop and say, okay, if you swear to not come against us to battle, and if you lay down your weapons, you know, we'll let you go. There's none of that in the Canaanite conquest. So Moroni was really maybe tenderhearted at that point and saying, okay, I'm giving you a chance to repent, which is really admirable. But then later on, he says in Alma 55:3, he says, we will seek death until they sue for peace. So he's kind of saying, look, we're going to be all out, wiping you off the face of the earth until you want peace. We're not going to stop the war in the middle and say, okay, now's your time, you know, lay down your weapons. You know, you're going to have to come to us for any kind of negotiation. And so, I mean, I like Alma, of course. He's tender, he's doctrinal, he lays out things clearly, but Moroni is just like the cleats on the ground. Third, the doctrinal matters. I was thinking the difference between pacifism and militarism. You know, we do have both examples in the Book of Mormon. The anti-Lehis you mentioned quite a lot. Them with would rather lose their lives than to take a life. And so there was a cause for pacifism, but even the pacifist children decided they didn't take the oath. They were going to go out and fight alongside their Nephite cousins, brothers. How do wars convince of Christ? Well, they fought for their cause, which they thought was better. And so we're going to have to, I think, in an effectual battle, as is said in Mosiah, there's going to be an effectual battle coming in which we're going to have to fight for a better cause. Our cause is going to have to be the better cause. You had asked title page that Mormon writes, and you mentioned about the prejudice that is had against the Lamanites. You know, they laughed them to scorn when they said we're going to go up to the Lamanites and you know, preach to them. Well, if the Book of Mormon is, and according to title page, written for the Lamanites, then it would be nice if, you know, you didn't write a book that was continually negative about the Lamanites all the time. That there was a time when the Lamanites were more righteous than the Nephites. You know, when Samuel the Lamanite came on the scene.
Right.
So when Moroni is super upset with Pahoran and writes his threatening letter, like, you know, we gotta get some supplies, and if you don't send them, we're gonna come, you know, get them. You're isolated, you're insulated there in the middle of the country. You're not seeing what I'm seeing. You know, I'm seeing my fellow brethren die, and it shouldn't be this way. I mean, if I was Moroni, I'd be brokenhearted. You know, the government has these supplies they're supposed to send us. They don't really care about us, seemingly. And here, they shouldn't have to die if we have the supplies every army needs. You know, so I see, you know, Moroni is just a great-hearted guy that puts his sword where his mouth is and says, you know, if you're not going to fight with us for this cause, that the cause of Jesus Christ and our, you know, our religion, our wives, our children, then get out of the way. Get out of the way, because he knew he was right and he was going to fight for it. So when I think about battles, I think, you know, we're supposed to be battling Satan, and you know, it seems like in the Book of Mormon, the Lamanites are the scourge to the Nephites. Whenever the Nephites misbehave or become prideful, you know, in come the Lamanites to give them some uneasiness. And you know, there's much strategy and preparation to defend against some of Satan's attacks too. And so on the spiritual level, I think about that. You know, we're told would be given a way of escape from the temptation. So that's all I have. Thanks for stimulating my mind.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Interesting insights.
Okay, Paul, and then we have Blair, and then Terry.
I am interested in going back to your Elizabethan point, because it strikes me that going back 500 years in this case would take us back to the Spanish Inquisition. And with that Spanish Inquisition concurrent with much of what was going on in Elizabethan England, you have well, it's interesting that we still name our sons Henry, not very often Ferdinand. We choose sides as a result of our wars, and to be able to look back at that as a fundamental religious diaspora might very well make that a pivotal time to look back to. So I do appreciate what you're saying, that we have an awful lot of wars since that might very well be more compelling to us, but I can understand why a person would go back, particularly if they have a religious orientation.
Yeah. No, that's yeah. I think I mean, that modern analogy is also quite apropos.
Okay, I yield.
Okay.
Okay, Blair, and then Terry. Go ahead, Blair.
James, I very much appreciated your presentation, your view there of how Moroni is reacting with Pahoran, and they're very human. I would like to kind of pull thoughts in a little different direction, though. The friend David Spencer, who's living down in Silver Springs, northern part of the DC area.
Mhm.
And he is an expert on warfare, modern warfare, guerrilla warfare, and so on. He teaches, or used to teach, whether he's still got that kind of a job, I don't know, in some years since I've talked with him. He teaches about the history of warfare. He's written a book, and Paul, you might think about this book as being one that would provoke some thought among a Book of Mormon perspective group. I don't remember what the title of the book is, but it deals with Captain Moroni and all of those periods of time. And as you were noting, during one particular period of time, the Nephites had developed armor and the Lamanites had not yet done so. Well, the Lamanites caught up, so that both of them had armor, both of them had swords, both of them had spears, and then it became a war of strategy, a strategy of encircling one camp and making people think that they're going one way and coming back and encircling them and cutting them off and so on, the war of strategy. This, according to David Spencer, is basically the history of warfare, regardless of where you are. And the Book of Mormon tells that story of advancing warfare capabilities. And he wrote this book about it, and I encouraged him to do so.
Give us his name again, please.
I don't remember the name of the book, but his name is David Spencer, Spencer.
Thank you.
His point is that we are constantly in a period of expanding warfare. And I think we are in that position today. And this is no different from other warfare, except for the extent of escalation and back and forth competition, building. And now we have nuclear weapons, and we are threatening the use of nuclear weapons if you don't give in to me, and so on. This is all a pattern of warfare. Now, to put myself into this, into the 21st century, I think we're coming near the end when Jesus is going to be coming, and there's going to be a warfare that we've never seen the likes of before. And I don't think it's all that far off. But that's just my opinion. I think it would be good to invite David Spencer to give a presentation on his book.
I'll look into
I
that.
appreciate your viewpoint, James. Thank you.
No, it sounds very interesting. Now, I might note for the record that Hugh Nibley, long time ago, because everything with Hugh Nibley, he's been gone for a long time now. But in the 1960s or 70s, he published a book about the Book of Mormon, and he did spend a lot of space looking at the war chapters from the perspective. He had served in World War II as an OSS officer. He was like, because he was fluent in German and French and so forth, he actually was parachuted into France behind the lines a month before D-Day to liaise with the resistance and so forth, and spy on the Germans. So he had a great deal of this military, experience and expertise, and so he brought it to bear on these war chapters from a military point of view. And his argument was, that this is a very sophisticated, very sophisticated, very knowledgeable analysis of military, just from a military point of view. And he went into a lot of detail based on his own extensive military experience to show how this was just a very, very sophisticated analysis of the whole military history that Moorman gives. And I remember that was always something that really fascinated me, and I valued that a great deal when I came across it. So I would think, this is something that people with a military background seem to recognize in these chapters of the Book of Mormon. And so I would be very interested to hear, maybe a more recent perspective that this Brother Spencer may be able to provide on that angle. But I would make the larger point, of my argument is that the what was I going to make? Oh, the larger point is that the Mormons, what Mormon is describing is reality. He is describing real people with faults and, good qualities, going through real hard, real life situations. And I see that as Mormon's kind of entire project in the Book of Mormon that he wrote was, my tagline for the Book of Mormon is an exploration of how to live as a Christian in a fallen world. That's my view as to what a big piece of Mormon's larger project was. And this is just, one more example of that. So anyway, I'd be very interested to hear the perspectives that this fellow has.
I did see the name of the book. It is available. It's Captain Moroni's Command.
That's it.
Dynamics of Warfare in the Book of Mormon.
That's it.
Yeah, that'd be very interesting.
Okay. All right. Terry, go ahead, and then Paul. Oops, Terry, you're muted.
There we go. James, thank you for your presentation. When I saw the title of this, I said, well, what are we going to get out of this? Because most people, when they think of and read the war chapter, said, oh, I can't get out of this fast enough. I want to get something else. So it was interesting seeing something of value, comparing those two individuals. Second, I think the same way that Rick was, and I amen a lot of the stuff that Rick was commenting on. The critical historian in me comes about all the time in church history, especially. And most members of my faith take everything at face value, and I take very little at face value. For example, Alma the Younger lived in a more peaceful environment than Moroni did. Moroni's was facing total annihilation. And so I can fully understand his reaction to, his boss and what he had to do. Whereas, Alma the Younger, in a more peaceful situation, said, oh, let's go talk to those Lamanites about, joining us and that sort of thing. And so, when you look at the things in face value, they're radically different, but they're very similar when you look at the environment that they're doing those things in. And so there's a lot of church history that is not done understanding the environment they live in. I look at Joseph Smith and people say, oh, he did this. And I say, oh, he did this because that's the way he was raised and, so on, this sort of thing. So, so that's just, I just threw my 2 bits in there, and I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Paul, go ahead.
Blair Bryant just spoke a little bit ago, and I wanted to call your attention that I think it'd be appropriate to put the Bryants on your prayer list. His wife is going for a hip replacement, and I think it's the second one. And his son, Kevin, or grandson, Kevin, got hit by a truck in Washington, D.C. a couple of days ago, and apparently survived. But again, Blair clearly is needing support too because his family is hurting as well. And then let me also mention Steve Pineker's mother. I understand is I'm not quite sure what the Deb, can you help me out on her situation?
Yeah, she fell she fell a couple of months ago and she broke her wrist, and she's had her wrist in a brace of some sort. And then here a couple of weeks ago, she fell again at home and she broke a hip this time. And so she has had hip surgery and she is now in rehab. So far as I know, she is recovering okay and doing well in rehab. So, but yeah, they could stand some prayers.
Yeah, well, and let me add Bill Shepard to the list. His wife died recently, and so the difficulties of having to deal with that kind of situation is something I can very well empathize with. And so putting those three on your prayer list would be my first request. Then I'd like to go back, James, when I was looking at more of the background on you, to see that you had put together a proposal to rectify the problem between the Electoral College and the popular vote, an issue that rather divides our country, and to some extent people want to fight about it. And I'm curious if you'd like to share a bit of your proposal there, and maybe for us learn to be able to see that there are options other than fighting that we can use that might actually be reminiscent of the lessons we have in the Book of Mormon to apply to the modern world.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's a kind of obscure piece of work that I did. Basically, yes, I live many different lives parallel to each other. So in one of my other lives, I've written extensively about public policy and legal and constitutional policy issues. And so one of my projects was to go back and look at the Constitution and figure out ways to restore its original meaning, and to facilitate and to use the constitutional amendment process as a way of working out our differences. So, well, just to make a 30-second explanation, basically my larger argument is that the founders, made the Constitution amendable, and but unfortunately the requirements that they put in, because this was our first written Constitution, or is the first written Constitution in the world, so they made it too difficult to amend. And that argument is based on the fact that every other constitution in the world and every state constitution in the United States is easier to amend than our United States Constitution. And that's not, the founders were deliberately trying to make it, impossible to amend. They just didn't have any other models to go by. But everybody who's written a constitution ever since has made it easier to amend. So my argument is, my core proposal, which I have in another book called Are We the People, is to reform the amendment process to make it a little bit easier to amend. In other words, to make it actually possible to amend, not still very difficult, but possible to amend. And then with the view that then becomes the political, democratic, and legal method by which we can sort out the big issues of our society. So in other words, instead of having these vicious political battles and these this great frustration we have because either, it's either one side or the other side, and it seems like there's no middle ground. My view was that if we could have a constitutional amendment process, which was actually doable, which is now it's effectively impossible. But if it was actually doable, we could have debates. People would propose constitutional amendments to resolve different issues, and we could have our debates in that context. It would provide a sort of I'm sure there'd be very vicious and angry, political disputes over proposed constitutional amendments, but at least it would provide a forum, a framework for us to resolve some of our deep-seated issues, which we now have to resolve through kind of political skullduggery. And that is, I think, a source of a lot of the division in our society. So anyway, that's a proposal that I've put out there. So the idea on the Electoral College is just one of the proposals. I have like a dozen different constitutional amendment proposals, and that particular book, which is called 50 States, Not 6. In other words, the presidential election should be decided by a vote of all 50 states rather than 6 battleground states like we had in our just recently ended election. So I propose a method whereby you could keep the Electoral College, but make it a little bit, make it more reflective of the actual national popular will. And I have a constitutional amendment proposal that would, I would hope achieve that. But that's within the context of this larger project of mine, which is to try to move us toward using the constitutional amendment process as a way of working out our differences, as opposed to the political, skullduggery methods that both sides have resorted to, precisely because I think the founders' method for us to work out our differences, which was to have constitutional amendments, has been foreclosed by the unfortunate fact that unwittingly they made it too hard to do. So that's my.
Well, thank you for providing us an alternative that can give us peaceful resolution to conflict. I wanted to highlight that because so much of the time, well, we had the presentation at Joseph Smith III Home through Andrew Bolton, in which he pointed out that research on the wars from 1900 until 2020, I think there were something over 500 major conflicts that have been addressed, and I think that there were something like 3 to 5% had been resolved with warfare, but 25% had been 23% had been addressed by warfare, but only about 3 or 5% could be considered resolved. 56% had been just double that, had been addressed peacefully with a very high resolution on the peaceful resolution of conflicts. And so the peaceful strategies tend to work much better than the violent ones. And to be able to see your contribution to that is something I wanted the participants to be able to appreciate tonight. Thank you for being an advocate for a peaceful strategy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for noticing this, my other life. So anyway, for those who are interested, if you go to Amazon and punch my name in, these books that Paul's referring to will all come up. It's just when you punch my name into Amazon or Google, you have to use my middle initial W, because otherwise you come up with Professor James Lucas of Oxford, whose specialty was the German military in World War II. And you get a bunch of books about the German military in World War II. So you have to use my middle initial to get to these books that Paul is referring to.
Thank you. Terry, go ahead.
I'll just get on my political horse for a second and just get off of it. The Electoral College, the biggest farce in this country. Every other election, it's percentage. The person that wins 51% versus the person that gets 49. 51 wins. It's not so in the Electoral College. Nobody's vote matters in the Electoral College except the majority. And so that needs to be changed, but that's, I'll get off my high horse there.
Okay, well, my little book on that is called 50 States, Not 6. And as I said, if you want to go on to Amazon, it's there. It's pretty cheap. It's a short little book, so you can get it for like just a few bucks on Kindle if you're interested in that. It's an approach which recognizes that there's powerful forces that like the Electoral College. So it's a politically realistic approach, which says basically, well, okay, we're not going to get rid of the Electoral College because there's too many people who like it, but let's make the allocation of vote in the states, let's make that proportional to so you get closer, you keep the Electoral College mechanism, but it gets you way closer to the popular vote. So that's sort of my proposal, to try to deal with that in a way that's politically realistic.
Okay, I don't see anybody with their hand up at this point. Who else is ready?
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the fine discussion. It is approaching, it's a little past 9:30, and some of us have work and other responsibilities tomorrow. And so you're welcome after I sing to hang on and chat a little bit more. But thank you, James, for a fascinating presentation and lots of good questions and comments all around. And I'm a little bit surprised at some of the other people that I would have expected. I mean, here's Ron, here's Bill, there's Jeannie, people that, and there's Brent. We've had several people get in like usual, but it's interesting that there's all these good wheels rolling around in these heads out here, and not all of them got to get a word in. So if you want to stick on, you're welcome to. Deep river, my home is over Jordan. Deep river, Lord, I want to cross over into campground. Oh, May. Oh, I lost it. Lost my words. Well, anyway, we get to the promised land, and for us to be able to cross that deep river with all of its crocodiles in it and be able to get to the land of peace, many of us probably can only hope to get across the river, not get gobbled up by the crocodiles, and maybe have a chance to camp out. But the Zion that is across that deep river that we need to be living toward and working toward is a marvelous promised land. The promised land, the Book of Mormon, is so richly endowed with giving us hope for. So I bid you good night. May the good Lord bless you as you cross the river into campground, or hopefully we can get our next generation all the way to the promised land of Zion. Good night.
All right. Thank you, everyone.